Welcome to What's Your Signal, the podcast exploring enterprise networking trends and the secure connectivity that underlies it all. You're joined by me, Taylor Walker, and my co-host, Mauricio Steffen. Hey, Mauricio.
Hi, Taylor. How's it hanging? You're sounding a little stuffy there.
I'm a little under the weather, but I think I'm ready for today's discussion. It's one that's going to drive you wild. Yeah, get ready. Okay, so Mauricio, really though, what kind of car do you drive?
I drive a 2022 Ford F-150.
Okay, so it's like new enough that it probably has a lot of automation to it, like most modern vehicles.
Oh, that thing is a rolling computer. I don't think that there's a mechanical part left in vehicles anymore.
Do you like that, or are you not a fan?
It's a mixed bag, right? I'm very much a technology person, right? I'm very much into like the newest tech and an early adopter in my own life. But, there's something to be said about being able to work on your own vehicle. Like my first vehicle was a 74 Ford Gran Torino. And if you're at all familiar with that vehicle, it has a huge engine compartment. Like, I'm a big guy and I could literally crawl into that engine compartment and close the hood on top of me. So, there's something to be said for old school mechanical, being able to fix those things yourself. But, there's something to be said about better living through technology.
That's true. And, I think as much as we think that technology is cool for our personal cars, I agree with you. I love that stuff. I feel like I'm in the Jetsons or something. It's also something that is really high value for companies and government agencies who are getting out of the technologies of the olden days, or, older types of technology, or the fix it yourself with a wrench kind of technology. And now they're really moving into these newer digital platforms. And so the convergence of evolving in-vehicle technologies, especially with advanced cellular routers, is completely changing how fleets work and thrive. And our guest today knows this as well as anyone. David Eiler is the CEO of Forward Thinking Systems, which specializes in fleet solutions. And we're going to pick his brain about how fleets have changed through the years and some of his favorite innovation stories, and why the evolution of cellular is one of the keys to it all. Well, David, welcome to the podcast. We're excited to discuss what's going on in fleet vehicles these days. But first, though, you've been helping fleets for more than 20 years. So yes. A lot has changed.
And thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Of course. Yeah. So a lot has changed in that time, in a couple decades. So how would you describe
When you keep saying it, I feel really old.
I know. Time flies, though. I mean, it's already been 5 years since COVID.
It is. It goes so fast.
It feels like a lifetime, though. A lot has probably changed in that time, though. And I'm curious how you would describe the state of digital technologies and vehicles back when you first started in this industry, and kind of maybe how some of that has changed over time.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the most dramatic thing, just even looking at any of these devices, is that trackers were gigantic. They were super, super expensive, and they took forever to acquire signal, right? So you'd be super lucky if you could get a blip meaning a locate, latitude, longitude, speed, every 5 minutes or so. It would usually take a minute or two to acquire signal, and then it was going across 2G on cellular, if anyone remembers what 2G looks like. I think there may even be still some hanging around for some IoT devices, I think. But it was definitely a very different world. Today we're getting stuff super fast, very often near real time, maybe every 5 seconds, certainly every time that you need to get that data. Meaning there's no real constraint anymore on getting that data. So if the data is appropriate to come across, meaning a diagnostic trouble code that's popping up on an engine, or some sort of temperature that's going up in the back of a vehicle, any of those things can come across right away, and you can see it in the portal, you could see it on your app. I'm not even sure. I mean, we started this in 2005. I'm not even sure if there were apps back then. Certainly we didn't have any within the system. But now you can, pull up your iPhone and see all the information right over there. So it's definitely come a long ways. And then all of the ancillary stuff that comes along with it also have come a long ways, meaning now we're doing AI cameras that are tracking safety and that type of stuff. AI certainly wasn't a thing. I mean, it was a thing in like colleges where they would study it academically, but no one thought that you'd have all of these LLMs and ChatGPT and machine learning and all of that stuff, right? So it's definitely come a long ways where we can see a lot more rich data, and we can provide really valuable things to the fleet managers and to the drivers that keep them safe and keep them informed.
What kinds of things can you mentioned a few of them, but just I guess to kind of help set the stage, what are some of the things that were the first things to be tracked? It sounds like maybe GPS. And then like what sorts of things are tracked today? There's like temperatures, emissions, speeds, maybe like
Yeah,
what
so
sorts of things are
so
we
fr
tracking?
from the device itself, right? Like if we're talking about any of the different cradle points that are out there, it used to be like an IBR 900, now it's a 1900 or whatever the latest and greatest mobile cradle point unit is that you have deployed within your vehicle. It used to be that we were just getting a NEMA string, which would be latitude, longitude, heading, and speed, and that was it, right? Now we're getting things like CAN bus information, which means stuff coming from the vehicle's engine, like real odometer or real engine speed or diagnostic trouble codes. So as soon as a light comes on the vehicle that says check engine, that goes right back over to the fleet manager or the maintenance guy, and then they can see a decode of that information and know what's going wrong, and maybe call the driver and say, you need to stop driving, this check engine light just came on, something bad could really happen. And then they could bring it into the mechanic and say, hey, this is a pretty routine thing, it's this air filter, is whatever it might be, and then they know that they're not being taken advantage of. There are so many different examples of that.
Is there any I guess just from my own knowledge, are there any systems that can be controlled by the fleet managers? Like if the check engine, this might be an extreme one, but let's say like the check engine light comes on, can they just like shut down the vehicle? Or like if it's like a sensor in the back of the fleet, like maybe for like a refrigeration compartment, can that be controlled remotely? Or is it just more of a notification and then the user has to do something beyond that?
Yeah, great question. So depending on the devices, there are definitely digital inputs as well as sometimes digital outputs, right? And what you can actually do over the air is you could trip a digital output, which just means kind of, an on-off switch that's going to some sort of relay that can control just about anything you can think about. Um, we don't love doing ignition kills, for instance, just because certainly we'll never kill the fuel line or something like that to make them pull over to the side of the road. But even an ignition switch kill is not necessarily a great idea. But certainly you could do other stuff like lock and unlock doors. Depending on what's appropriate for the vehicle, you could do all sorts of sensors. And then the beauty of the cradle point is that really it's a computer that's within the vehicle, right? So there's an awful lot of compute in there, and you can attach ancillary devices, right? So for us, for instance, you could attach a BLE beacon, and then you can communicate across with that BLE beacon where you're saying, what is the temperature? When was the door open? Any of those types of things where you can just send out those messages from back in our IntelliHub portal. We can just send those things out or receive that information back in. So it is very much a two-way, and that's where it gets into like really interesting opportunities where we've seen stuff in the healthcare space where they want to know how their machinery is operating with potentially generators where we want to see when oil levels may go low or at what output they're giving. It's really incredible the amount of data that can be pulled in through these devices now, and the amount of data that can be shown both within our website, within IntelliHub, as well as with the mobile apps.
David, you mentioned like being able to see like real time, right? Because uh, you know, going from my first car was a '74 Ford Gran Torino. There wasn't a computer in that thing.
It's a
Like
good car. It's a good
it was
first
all
car.
mechanical. Yeah,
Okay.
it was all mechanical. To like today, I drive a F-150, which is just a rolling computer. Like very little
That's
mechanical
right.
anymore.
Yeah.
It's just a
Yeah.
rolling computer. Like, what are some of the things that people are? You mentioned like the mechanical stuff. I mentioned the difference because right, you mentioned like sometimes the dashboard light comes on. That's all driven by the computer in there, so that gives us the ability to offload that to determine is the vehicle safe to drive, etc.
That's
What are
right.
some of the other things that you see customers doing with the data? And is that I'm leading the question here because I think I already know the answer, but like is that leading to like increased efficiencies or other um, really kind of dollar metrics, right? Because at this point, I think everybody in business is familiar with doing more with less. So any new solution that costs money has to kind of pay for itself. So how have you seen customers get additional efficiency so that these solutions start to pay for themselves?
Yeah. So there's definitely a tremendous value in monitoring all sorts of stuff around fuel, right? Fuel and maintenance are two of the biggest things when you're thinking about how can you save money on the vehicle, right? When you're looking at costs from kind of a top line down, right? You've got the person that's in it, right? You have the vehicle itself and how well is that person driving that vehicle? How safely are they driving it? How much maintenance is required for that vehicle? And how long should you keep that vehicle? Right. So some of the parameters that we can get back that help with that are both from when you're dealing with the driver from that first level is how well are they driving it, right? So are they harsh braking, harsh accelerating, are they speeding, right? And when you can control or monitor those parameters and then coach based on those parameters, you can bring down those fuel costs, you could bring down the maintenance costs, and you can increase the safety. All really, really important. And then also from a monitoring of the parameters, you can actually get the fuel economy. So you can get the percentage of fuel that's there. Again, if a diagnostic trouble code is popping up, that's a maintenance thing that has to be brought in. And then even stuff like tire pressure management, right? So being able to see that all of the tires are filled to their right levels creates tremendous efficiency, both on fuel economy as well as on wear and tear on those tires.
These are all things that are so good for fleets, but man, as I'm listening, I'm like, if there's any parents of teenagers listening, I'm sure they would love to have all of these features in all of the cars that are being driven by the teenagers.
I'll diverge a little bit because like I have a little story to go along with that. But yeah, my niece actually, I would love to have a system like that in her car because I've had to take her car to the shop twice already. She's only 17, got the car when she was 16 because she hard accelerates and hard brakes and runs into curbs. And
Oh
so, you
no.
being I think you're absolutely on the right track, Taylor, is like not just fleet management but parent of team driver management is also I think an untapped use case there.
Which,
Yeah.
to be fair, I think anybody managing anything probably often feels like they're just parenting. So it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, so there is for sure a little bit of that, right? But so one of the apps that we have is called Drive Shield, and that's an app specifically designed for the drivers. So what it does is it shows the drivers the video clips of what they did, and it lets them self-coach. This way, before it even goes over to the manager, the driver themselves are saying, "Well, you didn't keep enough following distance. Well, clearly you had your cell phone to your ear." Or you were departing lanes without signaling or any of those things, it actually uploads a video. The driver sees it and they can comment on it, right? Because they may have hit the brake really hard, but they did that because a kid or a dog or whatever ran out in front of the car and they actually saved the life of that person or that animal. So they can actually say, no, don't ding me for this, right? I did something good over here. Or I see what you're talking about. I should have kept more of a following distance. I'll do that next time. And just to tell you my own story as far as kids and driving. My two girls, both one of them has her license, one of them is going for it now, and having the fleet cam in the car, they both asked, show me the video of what just happened, because one of them was cut off and she's like, I don't understand where they came from. I know I had to hit the brake really hard. So it's like, okay, well, we'll watch it back together and we'll see, could you have done anything better, or was it good enough that you just hit the brake and that you saved us from colliding or something like that, right? So being able to I think from a safety perspective, I wouldn't let my kids drive without it, but having that visibility where you can coach on that with the person that comes in. So if it's a driver of yours, you can say, I know that it went off in the vehicle and it gave you an audible alert of a following distance warning. Maybe you disagree with it. Why don't we watch that together and see if there's a way that we can improve on this, right? So that you are keeping enough of a distance and you have enough reaction time so that it stays safe. So Taylor, you're absolutely right. I think it's fantastic for parents to see it, but in the commercial space where we're primarily in, it is very much the same thing where you can the driver can coach themselves, and then the managers can also coach them if they need to down the road.
I was gonna ask specifically about that, David, right? Because a lot of times, drivers, and depending on where you are in the countries, drivers can be represented by a union like the Teamsters or whatever, and you hear a lot about not wanting to allow employee monitoring and stuff like that. So it's great that the drivers can actually not necessarily take control of what's being monitored, but get an opportunity to see what's being monitored, comment on it. So if there was something that wasn't captured by the dash cam or the driver cam, that they can say, hey, look, here's the part that you didn't see. How do they, like, with that functionality in there, does that kind of improve the acceptance of the drivers of these kind of technologies?
Yeah, so that's always a little bit of a training, and I think that it it has to take the approach that ultimately we're trying to get you home safely, right? We're trying to protect you on the road, keep you safe on the road. And by the way, if someone cuts you off, and very often, the big company is always blamed, you're going to take a hit on it. Now you have a video to prove that you weren't at fault, right? So I would say that there are two things that kind of sway that. One is that, when the driver is like falling asleep, you'll see like the head nodding. I'm head nodding in the camera. I'm not sure who has video and who doesn't, but when the driver is head nodding and or slapping himself or reaching behind their head because they're getting tired, and it says fatigue driving detected or distracted driving detected, and then they wake up and they get their eyes back on the road, they're like, oh, thank you, you saved me over there, I was falling asleep. Or if God forbid they're in an accident and then they have the video to exonerate themselves, all of a sudden they're a big fan of the system. Thank you so much for helping me out. But I will say that we've put a lot of effort into privacy modes, right? So we have modes where you could have, there's a camera on the driver potentially. They don't have to. They could just do a road level one if they want to, where they're not recording the driver at all. But there are good benefits to having a camera on the driver, because you can actually see when they're falling asleep or distracted or using a cell phone, smoking a cigarette. So what we could do is we could capture that event without actually uploading a video. And then if it happens multiple times, then they could turn it on and say, listen, it keeps telling me that you have a cell phone event, or keeps telling me that you're distracted. Why don't we turn on that video, look at it for a little bit, we'll see what's going on, and then we could shut it off again, right? So that we've done a lot to kind of um, educate around that this isn't a big brother solution as much as it is that it's super important from a safety perspective for both the driver, the fleet, the pedestrians around, that you're driving in a really safe manner.
David, I think you've really emphasized that, safety is one of the biggest driving factors of that digital transformation in fleet vehicles and of a lot of the things that are powering your solutions. What are some of the other driving factors, would you say, that are making change happen in this particular industry?
Yeah, so just being able to track all sorts of different things, right? And I'll give you a couple of use cases, right? So we talked a little bit about BLE beacons, right? So you can take, a really little, like something the size of, an inch by an inch or so, right? And put that onto a piece of equipment and know where you left that piece of equipment. Or if you start to pull away from the site, you can know that you left that piece of equipment behind, so that you're not all of a sudden disappearing tools, right? Because we hear this in construction all the time, that they went out with a ladder, they went out with a drill, and all of a sudden they come back and where's my ladder? Where's my drill? I don't know which of those 20 stops I left it at. So now all of a sudden you can tag those things. Or being able to see on a piece of healthcare equipment that it's supposed to be running at a certain temperature, within a certain voltage, within a certain analog reading or digital reading, and then you can get back those parameters in real time and see throughout the day, what happened to it. In pharma, in produce, right, you need to be able to see that you got from point A to point B, and it always maintains the right temperature. Or delivering high value goods, pick your high value goods, in areas where marijuana is legal. You don't want them opening up the back of the door when they're not at a stop. Or you can go simpler with someone delivering a gigantic thing filled with iPhones. Or we do some stuff with armored vehicles, and it's really important to know when you're opening or closing those doors, where you were throughout the process. There there are just countless examples of things that can be tracked that really bring a tremendous value to the organizations.
You've brought up like you've alluded to some of these stories already, but you've had customers in some really different industries, it sounds like. And with so many of these unique scenarios, I'm kind of curious what some of your favorite, I guess, in-vehicle innovation stories are that you've come across.
Sure. I guess just in general, I get excited when I see people making good use of the technology, right? So when I can see that someone's, putting in one of these cradle point routers and then using it, with our technology, whether it's a camera or whether it's one of these inputs, it's really awesome. So now that we have access to the CAN bus information, which is the computer on the vehicle. One time we were able to actually put it into a bunch of construction equipment, and these construction equipments are tremendous. I mean, these things are pieces of equipment that like decimate bridges or knock down roads or buildings. Incredible things, just huge pieces of equipment. And they needed to monitor what the oil temperature looked like on it, what the rotations looked like on it, what the pressure looked like on it. And we're able to get back all of that information and create kind of a report or a graph off of when they were within parameter and when they were outside of parameter. And that allowed the people that were selling these pieces of equipment to track their equipment and see maybe potentially where there was a fault on it, where it went right, where it didn't go right. I saw Elon Musk speaking last night about one of the launches, and I think unfortunately it didn't go well. But he was saying how one of the things that's amazing is because he's using this Starlink on it, he's able to get back so many pieces of information so quickly that they can iterate on that and see exactly what went wrong and how to improve it for the next go. So this company was able to do something similar where they had all of those pieces of information at their disposal, and they were able to see, well, is this piece of equipment failing? If it is failing, why is it failing? Was it because it wasn't used right, or is it because we didn't manufacture it right, where we could have done better the next time? And having that type of stuff, I think, is really, really cool.
Absolutely. Are there nuances that you see in the needs between different industries? Like, do they change very much, or for the most part, are they using similar applications? Just put a healthcare stamp on it or put a construction stamp on it.
It definitely changes, right? Because you know, first of all, having all of this new technology, having the ability to do it with 5G, or to have satellite come across, or to have really quick compute, creates opportunities to gain new information. And once you've gained that new information, you think about new ways of utilizing that information. And sometimes legislation is creating that. I mean, we work with California on CA bar and clean truck, where they want to make sure that the vehicles are operating well. The EPA cares about that a lot, that there's no smog that's emitting that's beyond the scope of the vehicle. And we can actually monitor some of that stuff remotely to make sure that vehicles that are operating within California, we can pull out of the actual, again, the CAN bus, the ECU, OBD of the vehicle. We can grab that information and make sure that those vehicles are operating within parameters. We can track on fuel consumption how much CO2 potentially is being emitted, right? So that type of stuff is created by legislation, but I would say that there's equal or more that's just created based on the value that the organizations are seeing by understanding their operations better. And every week, a new opportunity comes up where people are asking for really cool technologies.
Yeah. How do you see how do you see this, like your solution evolving with the electrification of vehicles?
Yeah. So, first of all, there's so much more data available on the vehicles than there ever was, and that data is becoming standardized, and we're able to get parameters, stuff like what is the charge level, what level was it charging at? Is it charging at a 2 or a 3? What's the efficiency of it? How far are you going, and are you going to be able to get back on that charger should you stop at a charging station? Which vehicles potentially should be switched from being a gas vehicle to being an electric vehicle? And we're able to provide a lot of that really great information by seeing how far that vehicle is going throughout the day, how heavily laden they are, right? What is their load? And is it going to make sense for an electric vehicle to take that over or not? So it's really interesting as we move more and more towards electric vehicles, and all of the fleet managers at this point are evaluating their fleets and trying to decide, should I stick with the vehicles that I have? Which vehicles should I stick with? Which ones should I move over?
You mentioned the use of Starlink, and it made me think like obviously to do all of this tracking, all of these metrics, all of these diagnostics, you need to have a really reliable connectivity solution in these vehicles. And I'm curious, what kinds of things can organizations do in vehicles today with 5G and even with satellite that they couldn't, or maybe they wouldn't even attempt to do years ago with something like 3G or 4G or 2G, like you were saying?
Right, right. So I mean, some of the awesome stuff, without plugging Cradle Points or Ericsson too much, but some of the awesome stuff about those routers, and the reason why we love being a part of this ecosystem, is that there are on many of the devices dual modems or a WAN plus dual modems, where it can actually fail over, right? So you could have, for instance, a FirstNet, an AT&T FirstNet or T-Mobile T Priority that are both going on simultaneously. And then if you've got one and it's not there anymore because one of those towers came down, you can flip over to the other one, or you could flip all the way over to Starlink and go straight up to satellite and continue that connectivity, which is really, really cool. So you can also do that, by the way, with eSIMs. So eSIM is a really great technology where you can just flip carriers based on availability, and potentially have on a single SIM multiple carriers. So it's really come a long way in that regard, and having that high availability is critical. It's critical for government first responders, but it's also critical in private sector. Everyone wants to have that data that we've just been talking about in real time and not lose that data. Often we're also dispatching, by the way. We didn't mention dispatch, but sending jobs out to those tablets and then giving them those turn-by-turn directions and then getting back the information that they actually made that delivery, getting image capture, signature capture, proof of deliveries are really, really important. And that provides information to the customer, and they can say, oh, you're going to be here in 5 minutes, or, oh, I see, you actually did hit my dock already and this guy signs for it. I could tell them that product is in.
Yeah. Yeah, this actually just made me think of another question. With all of the data that you guys are collecting, does any of that data get shared with like manufacturers or vehicle manufacturers or anything like that to kind of help further improve the experience like on all levels, or is that just kind of kept with you guys?
Yeah, so a lot of that is up to the customer
Mm.
themselves, right? So customers will set up all sorts of interesting integrations. It is really the customer's data, and the customer has to agree to those sorts of data sharing. But assuming that the customer agrees, we can do all sorts of really interesting integrations with fuel cards, with temperature in the back of vehicles, with OEM information that could come across from the vehicle manufacturer, and we can push those into partners, right? Insurance is an interesting example of that, as well as pushing them back into the customer's backend system. It could be a maintenance system. It could be a system for time clocking. It could be a system, for their customer service, right? That we just said. So having that information accessible through APIs, through Kafka queues, is very, very powerful.
So, David, obviously we talked about all the rich information that the solution gathers, which brings me to, I think, a very important question that I think our listeners might want to know is all this data, the ability to control the vehicle, all of that seems like it would be ripe for a bad actor to try and get access to. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of security in your solution?
Yeah, absolutely. So um, it's not as straightforward as you might think as far as getting in there and taking over control of a vehicle. A lot of that stuff is very much firewalled, and the devices do have to be locked down. We pay very close attention. Um, uh, from a data security perspective, we have a cyber team that's on board to make sure that we're keeping up with everything that's going on from a cyber perspective. We do have a SOC 2 certification, which was very important to go through and make sure that we're always complying with all of those, with all of the different standards that kind of create a mostly secure environment. I think that it's dangerous to say that anything is impenetrable, but we do our very best to make sure that we're providing a very, very high level of security to our customers. And I think that Cradlepoint is a great example of a best-in-class piece of hardware that does adhere to those standards as well, and takes that kind of stuff very seriously, right? So there's all sorts of authentication, um, uh, two-factor, as well as encryption going on the devices, and we have that both in motion and at rest, meaning that that comes across the pipe, an encrypted pipe back to us, and then in our data centers we have that same thing going on. I hate that question just because it's super, super scary, right, from a customer perspective. But the truth of the matter is that we try our best to minimize any of those accesses, because when you don't allow for the type of ADAS or DMS things within the vehicle, you're doing a lot to prevent that, right? So you don't want to allow them to have actual control over the driving, over the braking, over any of that stuff. So all of the stuff that we're doing is that alerting and collecting without really interfering with the vehicle itself. And that's kind of a line that we take where we don't move past that. I leave the rest of the stuff to, like, I have a Tesla that drives itself, and it's fantastic and brilliant, but that's not the business that we're in.
Well, David, that kind of brings us to the end of our interview. Is there anything else that you'd like folks to know about this industry or the advancements in this technology?
No, you guys have been great. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's such a pleasure. I love the Ericsson Cradlepoint community, and it's so nice to meet both of you. Thank you for having me.
Likewise, we're so happy to have had you. We appreciate you being on, David.
Thank you.
Mauricio, I loved chatting with David because it reminded me a lot of when I worked at AT&T, like my very first job at AT&T, when I was working at a retail store. And we had an app that we would sell to people who were managing fleets, and like one on the phones. And it was basically just like GPS tracking. And at the time, that was like the really cool thing that a fleet manager could do. And so it's interesting now to hear about all of these different safety applications, all of these logistical applications. And it's all just done like behind the scenes, and how he was saying there's ways even for like drivers to coach themselves. And it's just come so far. And I think especially with, as we see the use of satellite become more and more prevalent, that those advancements are just going to continue to skyrocket. Like the things that they're going to be able to track and monitor for safety and operational efficiencies are just going to be beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I think the talking to David, it was super interesting. The thing is like vehicles, the use of vehicles in business and in public safety, public sector, have definitely evolved over the years, right? Everything from just being able to transport people and goods from point A to point B, to they've essentially just become rolling offices or rolling storefronts in themselves, right? You think of, law enforcement, right? That vehicle has essentially become their office. They do all their reporting in there. They're dispatched directly from their terminals. They have so many connected things in the vehicles, from lights and sirens to the weapons to the cameras, both in vehicle and on themselves, right? And then going into private sector, right? You have everything from service vehicles, right? So an example that I like to use from my personal life is I needed somebody to come repair my heating and cooling system. The guy showed up with a truck and a trailer. All the trailers were in the part, or all the parts were in the trailer. He had the inventory on the tablet. So as he's evaluating what's needed for my system, he can see whether he has the parts right then and there. He can do the quote and invoicing and take payment all, without having to go back to the office or call the office or anything, right? And you think about it even in your own personal life, right? We didn't get into, this is more commercial and public safety focused, but even just a standard personal vehicle comes equipped with connectivity, because we're just so hyper connected as a society. Everything from, instead of having to have that big fold out map or atlas, I don't know if you're old enough to remember going on road trips with those. Now it's Google Map and Waze, not Apple Maps, unless you want to end up in a lake somewhere. But we have Apple Maps and Waze, or Google Maps and Waze. You have Spotify and Audible and YouTube Music for streaming things. So no more books of CDs. So as we become more and more hyper connected, business has to become just as connected in order to serve customers where they're at. You think about, like, yes, there's still Michelin star, 5-star restaurants out there, but some of my favorite places to eat are food trucks. Like, they got some of the best food in the world comes from food trucks. So, people have to think about the fact that the vehicle is evolving to its own office or retail location, but it has the additional needs of vehicle maintenance on top of it, right? Compared to just running an office in a physical building, which does have maintenance needs, but they're not as critical as the vehicle if you expect that vehicle to be able to move around. So on top of just the standard trying to get connectivity for your applications, you need to be able to monitor the vehicle for maintenance. You need to be able to monitor driver behavior, record accidents, because not only is the driver liable, but ultimately the business is liable for that accident. So much that David's solution and forward thinking is addressing there in order to turn that into an effective office or retail location on wheels.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation about connected technologies and vehicles, please share it with a friend. Then rate and subscribe to What's Your Signal wherever you listen to podcasts.